Well, thanks everybody for taking time out of your day to watch this. This is an Artists' Rights Institute podcast, video podcast. And my name is Chris Castle. I'm a director of the Institute and a music lawyer in Austin. Our guest today is Kevin Casini. Kevin, why don't you tell folks a little bit about your background and how you come to
Sure,
be here?
sure. I reverse engineered my way into the music industry. I tried to be a musician, and I'm not very good, turns out. And you do have to be good to make a career of it. So, to provide value and stick around, I went to law school. I'm an advocate, I'm an attorney, advisor, counselor. Specific to what we're talking about today, I am a law professor. I teach at Quinnipiac University School of Law. We teach music business law. We teach copyrights, advanced copyrights, First Amendment free speech, entertainment law. And for music business and for entertainment law, it's kind of the cross section of topics of the day as they meet the legal aspects of entertainment industry. And this is at the forefront of everybody's mind, health insurance and larger unionization. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Woman. So this is what we're gonna go over today is those issues about songwriters in particular, because songwriters have always been, although there have been some efforts over the years, particularly in the screen composer, TV composer world, there have been some efforts over the years to organize songwriters into a union, but those have not succeeded as of yet. And there's some renewed interest in that as of late. And so we thought we would talk about what does it mean to actually unionize and how would that work with songwriters and how likely is it that the pieces are going to be aligned. Also, some of the pitfalls, and that sort of brings us into pitfall number one, which is unions typically are organized around employees. If you've ever seen Norma Ray, the movie Norma Ray, the classic scene where Sally Fields is holding up the signed
Yeah.
union, right? Well, all those people were employees. They were not freelancers, and songwriters, by and large, are freelancers and not
Mhm.
employees. And there are certain indicia which we can talk about that come into play with the when you start trying to organize people as a union. When you do that, you are really throwing yourself into the criteria of the National Labor Relations Act in the United States, at least. And that's a law that's been around since the Depression era, New Deal era in the 1930s, which started out in life called the Wagner Act, and then it's now commonly referred to as the National Labor Relations Act, which created something called the National Labor Relations Board. And the National Labor Relations Board is presidential appointees, and there's always a National Labor Relations Board that's continually meeting. And that is really your audience when you start
Yeah.
talking about getting a union. So, Kevin, why don't we talk about some of the, if you want, if you're trying to encourage people to think of themselves as employees, what and they're creators of copyright, what is the number one pitfall you see from
Yeah.
that
So
relationship?
I think you frame it well. The traditional sense of union labor management is the hourly worker, the salaried 40-hour a week, Monday through Friday worker, right? Monday through Friday, thanks to unions, by the way, right? Could have been
Right.
Monday through Sunday, 8 to 8. Um, but that definition really comes down to an employer-employee relationship, which means the end product of your work, the manner by which you create that end product, is really under the control of the employer, at the direction and discretion of the employer with prescribed manners. There may be things that you can look for to determine if there is an employee-employer relationship. But typically, it's defined by how much control those two parties have over the time being spent, the work, as the final product. And there are flags that you look for. Pay stubs is a good one, right? Lunch breaks. Is the employer or supposed employer paying payroll taxes, for instance, on you? Are they contributing into something? Are other people in your field already engaged in collective bargaining somewhere else? So there is a union for you to join. And so if you look for those flags, it becomes a little bit difficult to see that for songwriters because, as you said, traditionally they are freelancers. They are in complete control of how they operate, of the manner in which they work. The work product that they create is their creative discretion. There are some provisions in some agreements that say the studio, for instance, needs to be able to sign off on commerciality of a song that you deliver to them or something like that. And that can go to record labels more than music publishers or commercial outfits like Disney or Nickelodeon that employ regularly, employ lowercase e, writers to come up with songs for them. But if you, as the contractor, freelancer, are in ultimate control of the process and the product, then it trends towards you not being an employee, right? You don't have a boss, so to speak. You don't have a manager. You don't have set hours or a set place. And then there are even more mundane things that go into the question. Who is it that pays for the equipment that you use to produce this work? Your tax returns are also a good indicator. If you're writing off things because you're operating a business out of your home, for instance, a studio, if you are buying the materials and the equipment that you need to make this product that you're then ultimately selling, whether it's your time or a song, you're probably closer to a freelancer than you are to an employee.
And if you are an employee and you're creating a copyright, chances are that's going to be a work for hire, right?
Well, that's the other thing, and I think that's kind of a third rail of over organizing. What I think a lot of the folks that are looking to do to organize is just have more predictable and better living conditions and better working conditions, and I understand that they're entitled to all of those things, and there may be other means by which they can achieve them. But you've got to be careful, right? The devil's always in the details. And you and I have looked through plenty of contracts where you see that dastardly work for hire clause that's in there. If you are a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 with an hour lunch break employee, it's almost guaranteed that whatever work product you come up with will be work for hire product. And so the company, the employer, is going to have total control and full ownership of all the copyrights. So that means no royalties. That means no reversion rights because it was never yours to begin with to assign. That means no control over the exploitation or any of the creative aspects or implementation of the work. So if we're going to have this conversation, I think that's something that we definitely need to put towards the forefront, because any collective bargaining agreement would have to be hyper specific to that. Because if it's not mentioned, it's going to be assumed that it is work for hire. And that's not what I think anybody wants.
Right. Yeah. And it's it highlights that the commonality of interest issue too, when you're trying to organize under the National Labor Relations Act, because the NLRB, we're going to sort of throw around some of these acronyms. So National Labor Relations Board, the flesh and blood people who are your real audience here, are going to look at you if you apply to be certified, is what they call it, to be certified as a union. They're going to say, okay, so what group are you claiming to represent? And they're going to want to know what the commonality of interest is among those people you claim to represent. And if you are claiming to represent all songwriters and you include, let's say, composers in that, right? Well, composers may or may not have an obligation to give up your copyright, right? Their copyrights for the work they do. But the songwriters, and maybe even the composers as songwriters, right, to make it even more complicated, would not, right? In fact, the songwriters might have their own publishing company,
Yeah.
or they might have a co-publishing agreement where they share the copyright, or or at least have an administrator who who handles their publishing for them, or they own their own and self-administer, right? I mean, you have many different
Right.
versions of that story, but what's common to that side of the story is that the songwriter has retained the copyright and therefore will not be an employee for hire. And the
Right.
labels don't, if you're signing as an artist, they'll expect you to sign some work for hire language, which, is the subject of another podcast as to
You know
how
how I feel
enforceable
about
that
those.
is. Yes, exactly. But they will ask you to sign the paper, which sort of highlights an important point. Work for hire does not float in the air. It's not like the measles. It's you sign something. In fact, you have to sign something
Yeah.
to get for it to be effective. So it's not going to come up and surprise you. But so you'll have these two groups of people at least, some of whom are giving up their rights, and they know they are, right? And that's part of the deal. And others are not. And there may be some crossover between those two,
Yeah.
because even like in a
Well,
movie, for example, like I always use the example of Robin Hood, just because the record was so big. Um,
Brian
Everything I do, I
Adams.
do it. Yeah, Brian Adams. Everything I do it for you was co-written by Brian Adams, Mutt Lange, and Michael Kamen. And it was Michael Kamen wrote the score.
Film
He's
score. Yeah.
passed away now, wonderful composer. Um, um, wrote the score for the film. And that da 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 that refrain actually comes from the score, and they built it around that. Well, Michael Kamen retained that song, and that's not a bad song to retain.
For sure.
And so you've got different people in different categories. So when you go to tell your story to the NLRB, you want to try to be as clear as possible about it. So it's these
Yeah.
dividing lines are important.
It doesn't lend itself to clarity.
No,
There are dynamics in the publisher pub admin songwriter relationship where many times it seems like the publisher or the admin are actually working for the writer, not reverse.
right,
But even in one writer's catalog, you can have disparate treatments of works. Some will be owned by a closely held fake LLC just set up as Kevin Casini Publishing, for instance, right? And then loaned out, or maybe I've loaned it out to my LLC and I've hired an admin for a portion of my catalog. Let's say I do write things for score, video gaming score, something like that, right?
right,
Instrumental. I keep
right.
that segregated over here.
That's another
I
one.
write songs for my band, right? And I'm
Yeah.
the lead
Mhm.
of my band, the Kevin Casini Band. Well, I've got 4 bandmates, and the 5 of us share equally in those songs. We've all got 5 different admins or pubs and agreements there. I write songs for other people's albums, and they appear on those albums. I have to give that artist a portion of the credit because that's just how the game goes these days. And so she's got a publisher, right? And so we've got co-writes, co-pubs. And so I think the NLRB is your audience if you're looking to get certified. Of course, you've got to fit, if not cleanly, at least squarely into one of the groups that they can already recognize, that they see. That's the easiest way, is to check as many boxes as have already been set up as possible. You don't want them to try to be innovative. That's not something that they typically do. What you like to do is show how similar you are to other groups that already have been certified. And then it becomes an easier decision for them to make.
But not too similar. But not too similar.
So
because then they're going to say, well, why aren't you in that union? Yeah.
That brings up your other point. But if there is too much crossover, then they can identify that there's a group already out there that you all should go speak with, potentially join.
Right.
And we don't need to certify yet another union because there is one that speaks to exactly what you're talking about, right? Yeah. So you want to be close to something that's there so it's easy for them, but not so easy for them to say, well, no, actually just go join this, that, or the other thing. And then some writers are lyricists on some songs, right, and composers on others, and songwriters together. So it's not an easy box of Christmas lights to unwind and untangle necessarily.
So the way this starts with the NLRB, and there's a lot of spade work that has to get done before you make your pitch. And that usually involves professional union organizers. And there are such people. There's a lot of such people, and they're very good at it, as a matter of fact. The AFL-CIO, for example, which is a union of unions that includes pretty much, well, I wouldn't say everybody, but almost everybody. It doesn't include the Teamsters, for example, but there's a lot of unions that are affiliates of the AFL-CIO. And they have something called the Organizing Institute, which is where they actually train union organizers. So one thing that songwriters might do is reach out to them, because they apparently haven't reached out to songwriters that I know of, but maybe they haven't. I just don't know about it. But it doesn't hurt to reach out to them, because this is what these people do. That's all they do, is they organize ununionized workforces into unionized workforces. That's what they do. So I think that would be an important step for people to take who are interested in this, because that leads sort of to the next phase, which is where you collect something called the union authorization card, right? Which is where it's kind of like a declaration of intent before the election, and it's a form that's distributed to people who are interested in the union, and having the union represent them in collective bargaining, because that's really where this leads, right? Ultimately, the main thing that unions do is collectively bargain on behalf of the identified group that they are representing.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they get to represent them is by having the NLRB recognize the union, certify the union, and that gives the union then and the workers a whole bunch of rights under the law that the NLRB will enforce. So if they're going to do that, they're going to want to be sure that whoever they're bestowing this benefit on really is the true blue, fiduciary of the workers, right? So the first step along that path is to collect these cards, and then no one will be surprised to know the next step usually is for the NLRB to say, okay, now we'll have an election, and it'll be a secret ballot, and then you basically vote on whether you want, the workers in the workplace vote on whether they want that particular union to represent them. Because once you're in, you're in. There are variations in that story, but once the NLRB recognizes that union and certifies that union, then everybody who comes after that has to sort of decide whether they're in or out. Now, there's different versions of that story. That's kind of a technical angle of all this, whether you can have a closed shop, which generally speaking is illegal, but there's variations of the theme, most of which are governed by state law. Because, just as an aside, the next thing that came after the National Labor Relations Act was called the Taft-Hartley Act, and that dialed back some of the union powers and created right to work states, and other more modified versions of the union control. But
I
back
do like
to
how the state and federal laws that are in play that roll back some of the unionization stronghold legislative acts cast themselves as freedom always.
Yes,
right?
Always.
It's always your right to do this and your freedom to essentially have to work Saturday mornings or something.
That's
like
right.
that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's another conversation, over beers or coffees or something like that.
Yeah. Uber.
So the elections that you talk about, I think those are the ones that end up like hitting the news, right? You hear about Amazon workers are going to, have an election, make the election. Starbucks workers before, Northwestern basketball players or football players years ago. Do they decide if they want to? If they decide in that secret ballot, it actually is a no, it fails, then that's the end of it, right? It stops there. And essentially, it's not a go back to the drawing board. It's a full reset. There is no unionization process beyond that.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I'd say that they have a chance to go back and do it over again. They get a redo at some point, but they have to hit a threshold. I believe it's 30% of the workforce has to vote in favor of the union.
So
Um,
your point to speaking with AFL-CIO, for instance, I think it is a good one because for people like songwriters that are faced with really challenging working conditions and living conditions that they're looking to improve through their work, but also on the other side of it, royalty rates are going down, payouts are going down quarterly. They're losing money as they see it. Um, a couple of elections, it all takes some time. So maybe talking to AFL-CIO might be a means by which they can learn from the wins and losses that the AFL-CIO has on their record so
right.
that they don't make the same mistakes.
Yep, that's right. And by the way, we have two very well organized, long-standing unions in the entertainment business, being the American Federation of Musicians and the and SAG-AFTRA, which was merged, started out as AFTRA in our world, right?
Yeah,
So
film, television, radio artists joined with SAG, and they're pretty powerful. They've gotten a lot done,
oh yeah,
notwithstanding, I think the most notable thing of late was they actually did strike and go out.
that's right. That's right. They did. And they got a lot of concessions on AI, and they got a lot of concessions in general. And this is how it works, because what ends up happening in the music business in particular, when you go to collectively bargain with the labels, let's say, the labels form a bargaining unit, and this bargaining unit concept is important, right? To understand how this works. So you had SAG-AFTRA and the Musicians Union form a bargaining unit, essentially, and the record companies form a bargaining unit, and they negotiate what ended up being two different agreements. One is the AFTRA code, for recording, and then the phonograph record labor agreement for studio work for musicians, right? And there's some overlap between those two in terms of on a high level, but they cover two different communities of interest, right? You have the singers as a general rule, let's say broad strokes, on the one side, and you have the musicians on the other side, right? But they're all against, if you will, the record companies, right? You don't have a similar thing that happens with publishers. Maybe, you know, might be something to think about. But the in order for that to happen, when you think about it, you have to have these, it all fits, right? You have to have these communities of interest. The workers have to acknowledge that the unions represent them. The labels have to recognize that the union represents them, because even once you get the certification from the NLRB, that's subject to the employer objecting, right?
Mm.
Because the employer doesn't have to just take it. They can make objections. They may not win, but they can make objections. And then they're all governed by this network of what's called unfair labor practices, right? So the number one in all these collective bargaining arrangements is bargaining in good faith, right? And that sounds good, but it actually has a meaning, in collective bargaining world. So you can see that this all relates back to, did you start in the right way, right? In
Hmm.
order to when you get to step Z, was step A handled correctly, right? And and this is very important to keep in mind when you're going through this, is like, this is all for a reason, because ultimately at the end of the day, if you can't reach an agreement, you can go into mediation. There's like a federal level of mediation that they offer at the NLRB, and it's all very government oriented,
Hmm.
which kind of leads me to another point about this, which is you'll notice that nobody said anything about antitrust so far, right? And because what's happening here is we're saying, okay, well, these workers are going to get together. If you want to be harsh about it, they're going to get together and collude, as to how they can hold up, the employer and threaten, to walk out and, use all these other tactics. Well, we give them an antitrust exemption if they're doing it in a union because they're supervised by the National Labor Relations Board.
Right.
And the whole body of law, of which there's a lot, around collective bargaining. But what's interesting about this as well for songwriters, this antitrust issue, is that songwriters, when you look at the stream of income, right, the rates that are set by the Copyright Royalty Board for mechanicals, and you have an antitrust exemption there already for that whole process of the so-called participants. We can talk about that a little bit if you want. And then you also have the court supervised PROs, which, it doesn't cover all of them now, most notably not GMR, but it casts a long commercial shadow. So essentially it does cover, it has an impact, let's say, on the rates even that are privately negotiated. And it's not for want of trying. The Radio Music Licensing Committee has tried to drag GMR into an
Sure.
antitrust decree as it is. And they're probably trying every day. I'm sure that there are people who wake up every day gnashing their teeth that they don't have them, in front of a court. But so far they failed. But it doesn't mean to say that there's not some supervision, right? So when you look at what is the collective bargaining that's going to take place if there were a songwriter union? I mean, what do you think? What's left after
Yeah.
that?
So obviously, the government set rates, whether it's rate courts or at the CRB. The other PROs are viewing those as the floor, right? It
Right.
won't go any lower than that, but based on the impact or cultural import of our catalog, maybe we can get more, right? That's where GMR kind of comes in. So you don't really have to collectively bargain for that if the industry treats it as such. Now, industries change from time to time, and maybe it won't always be a floor. Maybe there will be full free market at some point, right? One can dream. But that doesn't seem to be what people, when I hear them speak or when I sit with them, what they're most interested in. Top of mind is some type of collectivized affordable health care. And I use that word as a loaded term because obviously we do have the Affordable Care Act, right? But other than that, I think they want more standardized agreements and contracts. And I think they want people as their publishers or their admins to be more responsive to what they need. They want them to not only improve the terms in the contracts that they sign. These are private agreements. You can negotiate however well you're able. But they also want the publishers and CMOs, PROs to just do better based on the terms that are already in existence. So if you sign up, if you want to collect royalties in our system, in many regards, you don't have a choice to opt out of an existing system. You have to join a PRO if you'd like to collect the royalties that the PROs collect. You don't have to. Your songs still have copyright protection. Feel free to try to negotiate directly. But if you want to enjoy in the spoils of their collective licensing, then you have to join them essentially, right? And you can only join one exclusive. So you don't have a lot of options. Publishers, you have more options available to you or admins available to you. But when you get to mechanicals, there are no options. You have one. And again, your option is yes or no, not which, right? And there are benefits to that industry side, and there are downsides to that for writers and for publishers also. But I understand why it exists. I think what songwriters want outside of access to healthcare is stability. They want to not have to give up writing and go get that 9 to 5 Monday through Friday job to support what they don't see as their hobby, what they don't see only as their creative outlet. This is what they do. Yes, it is creative, and yes, it does feed the soul, but it also feeds the families, right?
Right.
And what they want is protections against technological advances that seem to pull the rug out from under them, that continue to drive rates down. And if it's a lower rate on one side, but a much higher return someplace else, they might be willing to make that trade, right? But as they see it, the value of their production is being robbed from them, and they're still not even collecting on all of the value that is recognized. And they want to deal with both of those things. Now, that's a lot. How can a collective bargaining agreement CBA get that done? I don't know, because what you can't do is say we are writers and the industry is on the other side of this CBA. That's not how labor is going to work, right? You're going to have an employer somewhere that can't just be the music industry or the publishing industry, right? That won't be it.
Or the services.
It can't be the services in either, right? It really can't be any one spoke of this. And it also can't be all of them together. So what I said at the beginning was try not to let the NLRB have to be innovative and creative to make sense of your pitch.
Right.
I think that makes the pitch itself a high wire act. It's very delicate because you can't fall off one way or the other. You have to really find that thin line that explains it in a way that's understandable, but is separable and applicable to the industry in ways that you want it to be. Because I could see the other way. It could be that there's already places out there that they could join, unionized groups that are willing to take them as members and expand their numbers. And so they won't get certified. It could be that they cannot establish that there is some type of relationship that needs to exist. The NLRB will recognize to be certified. But it might be that if you look towards the end of what your goals are, there are other means to get there that don't involve the NLRB at all.
Right.
That
Now, interesting.
those are individual things, right? And that's dividing up your resources to have to fight them all on their own individual fronts, and that's challenging.
There
But
was a yeah. I was going to say there's some history of this kind of thing. There, not so much in this country, but there was in Canada, for example, they have something called, or they used to anyway, have something called the Mechanical Licensing Agreement, which was in place for a long, long time, that essentially did away with the control comp clause out of record deals, which is essentially kind of like you have the statutory rate that's set by the Copyright Royalty Board, and then it goes down, right? It's
they
called the
get you
minimum stat,
pay.
but it's actually the maximum stat, right?
They
So
get you to agree that you'll accept 7 cents for every dime that you're owed just because you've agreed to do so.
yeah, exactly.
And
So
they're
they
also
got rid
going
of
to pay
that.
you on 10 of the songs on that album, by the way.
That's
But
right. There are many different, there are many different, and we'll put this in the show notes. I've got a post that kind of lays out the control comp farce. Although that's gradually receding because of digital. Nowadays, people tend to pay full statutory on permanent downloads, and then streaming is calculated a whole different way, which is a whole other conversation. But the point being that there was an industry-wide agreement that the kind of the UK or Canadian version of the MLC, which way predated the MLC, got the labels to agree to, or at least the major labels to agree to where Canadians or earnings in Canada at least, and mostly Canadians, were not subject to control comp in all respects. And even that was not 100% waiver, but something like that, right, which is an industry-wide agreement that says, okay, we've got these issues as songwriters, and we want y'all to come to the table and agree to not do certain things. And as we get more and more into a digital world where somebody else is paying the mechanical royalties altogether, the labels might be more willing to entertain something like that.
Yeah,
For
agreed.
example, where they all agreed to forego recoupment of streaming against certain advances, right? And they've all the majors have pretty much agreed that in one form or another. You can question how sincere it was, and what it took to drag them to the table to do that, but they did it, right? And I think there's one way to look at the current interest in songwriter union and these issues like healthcare, like living wage, and so on, which is, well, you're never going to get it because, there's all these hurdles you have to go through with the NLRB. Maybe. But what's definitely true is it is an outcry, right? It is an indication that there's a need to deal with these
Yeah,
issues because it's sustained. This has been going on for years now, right? And it's reaching a fever pitch, right?
yeah,
It's also the product of a number of other things that are happening, like all these people who are writing themselves into songs now. Where you bring in a song that maybe you thought you were a 50% writer of, and it turns out you're a 5% writer at the end of the day, right? You didn't realize, oh, I only wrote the top line. Oh, well, of course, I take 5%. But things like that. There's lots of things that are going on out there where I think if the labels don't pay attention to it and the labels don't take it seriously, they're going to end up wishing they had, right?
yeah,
Because these are the kinds of things that led, if you look back far enough, they may not be employing the Pinkertons and the headbreakers at the steelworkers strike, but these are the kinds of things that lead to labor unrest, right?
yeah.
And I think they need to pay close attention to this and try to proactively find a way to reach some kind of industry-wide agreement on things which keep coming up, issues that keep coming up, like this healthcare. So I don't know how you feel about that, but I think that there are examples out there where the labels have done this kind of on a Band-Aid basis. Like, well,
Sure.
these people are complaining, I'll make them stop if I do this. And maybe
Well,
the
yeah,
suggestion is to do it comprehensively.
I think independent record labels in the majors and the Mindies, the major indies, they all operate a little bit differently, right? I've got independent record label deals or independent imprints under major deals that are in my inbox right now. I've successfully trained enough people to know, don't even send me an agreement that has a work for hire clause, right? Or a controlled comp clause, or a cross collateralization clause, because that's not going to happen. I'm just going to strike it. The client can get another attorney if they want. I'm not going to ever advise them that they do that. A lot of them are distribution deals that come over that are silent to those things because it's really just an 80-20 split. And we don't have to
Right.
get into those types of things. But, so from the legal, technical, and the agreement, or from the industry side, the business side for the artist, or even for the writer for that matter, I think things are trending in the right direction, at least in a corner of the world, at least in a bit of the sector.
Right.
But getting off of my high horse and speaking specifically about what labels should see as their long-term best interest. And listen, labels, small, medium, and large, have never been forward thinkers, right? They don't really try to look around the curve. It's very reactionary, whether it's share price or whether it's in response to, uproar, however that is. But even if I were completely cynical on the label side, I would say at the very least, you need these people, these artists and writers behind them to keep doing what they do. Otherwise, we're just suits and we don't actually have any talent in the music industry, at least. And there is no industry without music, right? I understand that the industry is the largest portion of it, but you need the music for there to be something that you can sell, that you can exploit, that you can collect royalties from. And so you need these people, and the artists are basically brands at this point, at the very top, right?
Right. Hmm.
This isn't like a movie where you get to see the trailer and decide if you're going to go. You're a fan of fill in artist name here. You're going to get access to consume the next release, regardless of what it is. And then you'll decide for yourself what it is or what it isn't, but you've already engaged with it, right? So there isn't a taste test in our industry. It's a brand thing. And so to keep the brands under control, you want to keep them doing what they're doing. So even if you were only cynical about this and you were only looking to bottom lines, you would want to at least invest in mental health.
Right.
So that from a business perspective, it becomes predictable. You've got someone on a 7-album deal. You would like them to give you that album every 15 to 20 months. If they're cranking out singles, you'd like one of those every 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And if they can fill up, the top of the funnel and you can drip from there, then that's great. But you need them to keep doing that because that's the business. And so investing in, even if it weren't just, physical health, just mental health investment, which in our society is separable somehow from the physical, that would, I think, help buttress the foundation of the record industry. How many times, Chris, have you heard, well, record labels are dying, but what the record labels do, there's no future for a record label. They are able to navigate and figure out a way to stay in the game somehow, right? Mm-hmm. But you won't be able to do it if, A, the songwriters have to go drive Uber or go get teaching jobs and not write songs, or B, if the artists are stretched so thin that they don't have healthcare, mental, physical, or otherwise, to be able to continue to do it, because you need them on tour to promote the songs. You need them making new stuff. You need them out there all the time.
That's right.
So,
and there's more and more demands on their time.
Of course.
It's like, he can sing, he can dance, and he's a hell of a musician and great to create compelling live show, but can he tweet? Right.
Yeah.
This is sort of the world we live in. Can he TikTok? Right.
He doesn't sleep, right? Let's get him on a podcast. Maybe he should do his own podcast. Can he act?
Yeah, right.
Right. Maybe he's actually now the creative director of a fashion brand.
Right.
You know what I mean? So keeping all of the acts healthy, happy, engaged in what they're doing in a way that's productive for the label, but also serves themselves and their art, I think that is the easiest decision to be made. Now, I'm not a record exec, right? I don't sit at the top of the studio, and I don't run a publisher. So, and maybe that's why.
Well, I can tell you, having been a record executive, you face this pretty often, right? And it's like this. It's like if you have a product that you want to get into Walmart, and you go down and meet with them at Fayetteville, Arkansas, they will drive a hard bargain. But you know what they leave you? They leave you enough margin so that you can keep supplying them.
There you go.
Right. And this is a point which seems to be lost on some people, right? And it's particularly lost on the digital services because, in a way, they don't really care if they get any new product because they've got so much catalog. And what they call catalog is, older than 12 months, right?
Yeah, so, sometimes 8 months, I think.
8 months, yeah, right. That's right. Gets getting shorter all the time. But, to your point, we have in Austin, maybe we should talk a little bit about some of the healthcare and mental health care solutions around our business. And the ones I know about most up front are in Austin. And we have 2 organizations in Austin that provide healthcare and mental health. One provides mental health, one provides healthcare. One's called SIMS, which has been around a long time, that does mental health. And the other is called HAM, Health Alliance for Austin Musicians. And they're sort of similar, but they basically offer services to musicians who live in Austin. And there's a, qualification step for that, and who are below a certain income level, right? Now, the way HAM works is something which I think travels pretty well. I think SIMS would travel well too, but HAM definitely would travel well because what HAM the founder of Ham was a fabulous woman who had um, was an artist manager, local artist manager, and had some relationships with the local hospital groups. And this is 20 years ago, so this has been going on for quite a while. And she basically made a deal with them to allow their outpatient clinics to be the primary care treatment centers for Austin musicians. So as long as you're in Austin, right, you can get essentially free healthcare if you qualify. And they go out and raise money. We have Ham Day and we have, lots of different fundraising events for them. Ray Benson, who's Sleep at the Wheel guy, big deal here, had has taken them under his wing. And there's a lot of there. I mean, the GSD&M and some of the big companies here,
Mhm.
local companies, have taken them on and are big supporters. So I look at that and I say to myself, well, I seem to recall the City of Hope, and the Martell organization and lots of hospitals that have benefited from lots of benefits and fundraising efforts by the music business.
Mhm.
So it seems to me that it should be fairly straightforward for something like this. It doesn't have to be the exact same thing, but it's kind of a localized version of this could happen in at least the centers, like New York, Nashville, LA.
Yeah.
I mean, if we can do it here, they should be able to do it there and could maybe show us all a thing or two, about how to get it done. Because there's millions of dollars that get raised for these other healthcare initiatives. So I would just throw that out there is that if what your goal is ultimately is to get these pieces, better living conditions and healthcare, you can break off some of these things and kind of
Yeah.
address them separately, right?
Yeah, let me call out also in Nashville, there's Music Health Alliance, and I will
Right,
give Universal credit. About a month ago, they announced a funding into a mental health fund.
right,
Um, Music Health Alliance helps for access to doctors, prescriptions, mental and physical health screenings, things like that. And you can call them up or go on the website and find out what services they provide, and that might fill a gap for you. Backline also is a good one that provides mental health and wellness, again, screenings, and can plug you into local networks. So yes, there are options that are out there right now, and maybe it's just a matter of more people knowing about them. I think as far as access to group health plans, for instance, the more people you've got, the less expensive it is. That's the concept of the Affordable Care Act, that forcing the bulletproof 20-something-year-olds into the plan helps pay for the cost of the people at the top who actually need it, right? You can get yourself into healthcare from the Affordable Care Act. I know people have, depending on where you are, different gradients of success with that because of affordability. Accessibility is
yeah,
one thing, affordability is yet another.
yeah.
So
It's
it's not
expensive.
just
I can
it's
tell you,
pricey.
it's expensive. Yeah,
And so it's not just access, right? But information is where it all starts. Education is where it all starts. Now, if there's a fund that the largest players in the industry can help set up, you end up feeding the ecosystem instead of bleeding it out.
right.
That makes sense to me from a bottom up. And so, again, I'll give Universal the credit that they should get for working with Music Health Alliance and standing up what could be something like what we're talking about. Of course, unionization is more than just access to healthcare, but that is a large portion of it. I think people should know that you can group together and go to a plan, get yourself set up, all of you in a group. You don't have to be a union to do so. You don't need to um, come with any armed knowledge about what it is you look for. If you represent a number of people that want this, the carriers will show you what your options are under their umbrella. So
That's right. And by the
going
way,
direct.
by the way, if you have, if you're touring in a touring situation or any of the, we spend a lot of money on insurance every year. Okay. You know, one way or another, we may just broadly stated, insurance in our business
Yeah.
is a lot of money. Okay. So the insurance carriers, one way or another, are making a lot of money off of us. So I think that somewhere in that chain, there's an insurance agent, insurance company, who understands the intricacies of doing this and recognizes the value of
Well,
being,
listen,
the first mover on this, who could help
I sit
out.
here in Connecticut, insurance
Yes.
capital of the world.
Yeah.
Um, there are people, there's an actuary somewhere
Yeah.
waiting to run something on his desk right now. He'd love for me to call and say, "Can you do this? I'm putting together something."
Yeah.
They, it'll be advantageous to them. They'll write up a policy, a couple of options for me. By the end of the month, we could have people into something. Now,
Yeah.
what are the terms of that? What are the conditions? What's the coverage like versus what you pay? That's a different story. Um,
Right.
but the insurance industry operates by writing new policies and finding new markets and developing new sectors that need insurance. So they'll absolutely love to write something like that for you. That being said, accessibility being one thing and affordability another, you do still need to get as many people together as possible. So it
Right.
could be a lot of the efforts right now around unionization could make a divergent pit stop along the way of going to get collectivized
Yeah.
plans. You can
That's
go
right.
get a group plan right now while you're sorting out the rest of the stuff. I think that is a very viable option for people that say, "Hey, look, rates are never going to get better, or I make my money on touring anyway, but gosh, I'd love to have dental coverage. I'd
Right.
love to have an eye care plan. I have a kid with a pre-existing condition, whatever it may be." Um, Dealing with those things one by one, like I said, stresses the resources and becomes challenging to focus. I understand that, but it could be a good way to plug some of the gaps, fill some of the voids that some of the people that we're talking about as artists and as writers are feeling, or at least are worried about.
Yeah. It's definitely a box that should be checked. And the thing is if it's not like they're going to say, "Oh no, I don't write, I don't write those policies. I don't. Your money's no good here." They're not
They're
going to
never going to
say
say
that.
that.
They're not going to say that. They're going to say, "Well, I can't do it unless blah 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 blah." Right. So you can then figure out if you can connect all those dots and act accordingly. But I think that there's enough songwriter groups out there right now that if they all banded together, um, they could definitely, I mean, they could definitely get the meeting and then figure out, is this something that you can offer? Because let's not forget, the unions already have healthcare, right? I mean,
Yeah,
the SAG-AFTRA and the AFM all each have healthcare,
yeah,
right? And every time there's a session, every time there's any work that gets done under that collective bargaining agreement, excuse me, the employer makes a contribution into that plan, which is why you can't qualify for the plan until you've had a certain amount of work, right?
yeah. There is a threshold that you have to check,
Yeah,
to demonstrate that you are in the industry, for instance, right? You haven't just accidentally written a song. Um, Through the Recording Academy, Music Cares offers access to health and life insurance. Also, if that's your only concern, there are ways to do it. But yeah, the industry itself, and that money comes from, well, whoever it is that paid for the session. So typically the label. I guess it could be
yeah,
another.
yeah. It's
Um,
usually the label. So it's
there,
pension, health, and welfare. Pension, health, and
and that's
welfare always gets paid.
studio musicians are going to be able to collect on that.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
is an administrative process to all of these things. There's paperwork involved, and that's the unsexy part. That's how I end up staying in the music industry, although I'm terrible at music. And I'm a worse songwriter than I am a saxophone player, also. So um, navigating these types of things. The insurance industry is set up to have new people come to it as often and as frequently as they can find them, right? Because every year a new set of drivers is licensed, and every year they need to be insured, right?
Right.
It's a beautiful scheme that they've got going.
That's right.
No, not a scheme. It's legitimized, and I think your point about healthcare is spot on. If you can get enough people together, and listen, a group plan doesn't need to be thousands of people. It doesn't even need to be hundreds of people.
No, definitely not. As a matter of fact, you can it can be like two employees, basically, I think is sort of like the threshold now. But it's really not that big a deal. And they have and they already have a lot of these things set up. Where you hear about these sort of blue chip plans is when the unions are very large and they've negotiated a bunch of things. And it's not like the carrier's giving them to the carrier's charging the employer for it, right? So that's usually why, these plans are so much a part of the collective bargaining negotiation,
Sure.
is because they are literally part of the
Well,
negotiation.
we're talking about the symptom, but it could be that the root cause is the inexorable link between the employer-employee relationship and healthcare in this country.
Right.
Those two things got tied together long before my time, and they haven't been able to be separated, right?
Right.
And we're not going to, in the music industry, sort that out and unwind all of that right now. But one of the reasons that we do have this issue with songwriters and with musicians is because they can't point directly to one single employer, and healthcare is so tied to that. If you're a touring musician, for instance, you're probably a writer and a recording artist, or you are a session person and you're on tour, either as the front, the lead, or in the band. In that case, if you're a touring musician, you would identify the band leader as your boss, right? So in that case, management is the front man who leads the band, right? Or maybe it's the touring manager who controls everything, right? Whoever is paying you and putting together that band, they're going to be the ones that you look to as the boss. So it's not so clean to find an employer and employee, and especially because people who live in LA, New York, Nashville, they got their hands in a bunch of different pies for
Right.
music. So they're, like I said, they're writing for themselves and for other people. They're recording for themselves and with other people. They're producing things. Because they're creative people in general. They're talented. They're in demand in lots of different ways. How do you coalesce that and say, well, that's my employer? That's where it becomes difficult, I think.
And now you've got income. Back in the days when most of your income was coming through recordings, let's say, and some sync, but from recordings, you had an easier identifying a source of potential uh, uh, collective bargaining opponent, let's say, not necessarily employer, but somebody on the other side was a little bit easier. Now you've got the services, right, who are paying the mechanicals for streaming, which is, theoretically at least a bigger, that's another discussion, but theoretically at least a large part of the songwriter income.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
maybe I guess just to sum it up, uh, it sounds like there should be some thought given to how much of this can we solve through, best practices, industry-wide agreements that are not collective bargaining agreements that don't require unionization. In other words, things we can do today, right? Is that realistic? Is there something that can be done um, to give some antitrust coverage to people who want to negotiate other aspects that are not covered by antitrust exemptions or under review by the DOJ already, right? Um, can we find an alternative on the insurance front that would help people with healthcare who aren't making a lot of money, like a ham kind of thing? Health Alliance for Awesome Musicians, or the one in
Mm-hmm.
Nashville, versus a group plan that would be more expensive. Are there alternatives that exist if you just look for them through other work you do? Like if you're a musician and you also write songs, or you're a composer and you also, record your score, and you're on union contracts, are you eligible for that anyway? Can you get a group plan through a loan out, or are there things that a business manager can handle a little bit differently? And I'm sure they all talk about this, but so this isn't like new information for anybody necessarily, but Or are there things you could be doing that you're not doing? Do you need to just go talk to your accountant and whoever handles your insurance for other purposes? So
Yeah.
there's some things that can be done right away that don't involve the government, that don't
Well,
involve the National Labor Relations Board.
not everybody's got a business manager, but I know
Right,
at least the good business managers can help you in this regard, can point you in
right,
this direction.
right,
Um, my wife is a litigator, and I have twin 7-year-olds, so I know when to choose my battles. Right. I think that this is not saying it's not possible or not going to happen, but the process is more wrought than, say, with a trade union, for instance, right? Somebody
right,
who's in the trades, um, that fits the model cleanly. And so the NLRB knows easily what to do with that. This might take longer. And in the meantime, people are still going without. So
right,
maybe they need to plug in to solve some of these issues along the way while they work towards what they think is the larger fix.
right. Yeah, priorities, you
Yeah.
know, as usual. Well, listen, thank you very much, Kevin. I really appreciate you taking the time. Where can people find you if they want to
Oh,
come looking
geez.
for
Well,
you?
I'm always on Twitter arguing with people. Um,
What's your handle there?
That's at KCESQ, just to let people know I'm an attorney. You always like to let people know that. You can find me online. It's CasiniLaw.com. Really just my musings and my brain dump on there.
Excellent.
Um, and if they just Google me, I usually pop up pretty easily for
Cool.
people.
Cool, man.
Thanks,
So
man.
yeah, definitely. We're artistrightsinstitute.org. We have a YouTube channel, Artist Rights Institute. I'm Music Tech Policy on Twitter, and christiancastle.com is the law firm. And we really appreciate Kevin, and we'll be posting this shortly. So make sure you like and subscribe, tell all your friends, and all that good stuff. And so hopefully we'll all see some advancement on this issue in the coming days.
Thanks again, Chris. Have a great one.
All right, buddy. Talk to you later then. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.